So here we are, and we have finished the Morning Glory quilt. That's what I've decided to name her. And as you can see, it doesn't really look very different than it did a couple hours ago because it was stitched in the ditch. The stitching and the quilting line has just run all around the applique shapes and in the piecing lines. It's not actually visible as a quilting element, as a quilting design. Now I get a lot of questions about the time it takes to quilt a quilt, so I've actually set a timer next to my sewing machine while I'm stitching through these 4 quilts so I can tell you how much time they take. And for this quilt, it took exactly 2.5 hours to stitch in the ditch around each motif. Now keep in mind, it took another hour, an extra hour, to hide all of my threads. Even the time that I saved by minimizing my thread breaks, by connecting the leaves to the stem, I still ended up with an hour worth of loose threads that I had to hide in the middle layer of the quilt. So that just lets you know how many thread breaks that you're probably going to have to deal with when you stitch in the ditch. And that is a time investment that you have to calculate in with your quilt. So it was a total of 3.5 hours really finishing this quilt top. So the quilting on this quilt is very open, and of course that makes this quilt top very soft and comfy. It's not stiff. It's very pliable, and it has a very nice drape to it. This would be perfect for something that was intended to be cuddled up with, like a baby quilt or a lap quilt, or if it was bigger, let's imagine it being a full-sized or a queen-sized quilt, then it would be something really wonderful to curl up with on the bed. But really, the quilting design and the time I invested in stitching in the ditch really didn't add anything to the overall quilting design of this quilt. How can it? I hid all of my stitches, and I spent all that energy hiding all my stitches in the ditch. So while stitching in the ditch doesn't really add anything to your quilt top, it also doesn't take anything away. I don't have any distracting motifs that are blocking the look of my flower designs. They're standing out, which if you have an important applique shape, if you have an important piecing shape and you want that to stand out, then maybe stitching in the ditch is the best option. We're really always trying to seek a balance between enhancing the piecing and applique design and creating a slightly new design with the quilting. There's nothing wrong with stitching in the ditch. I do it a considerable amount, especially with my other quilts that I add fillers to. You really have to master stitch in the ditch in order to also use fillers with them. So it's something that's really necessary. And there's nothing wrong with simply stitching the ditch to finish a quilt quickly. Now I want to give you my honest opinion. Overall, I found stitching this quilt in the ditch an extremely frustrating experience. My perfectionist button got seriously triggered when I was trying to stay right smack in that ditch, especially because I was contrasting thread with white thread so that way you could see what I was doing on the video. That really hit some buttons with me because I just started seeing every single flaw and every single mistake, and I kept wanting to rip my stitches out. And really, that's not the point. The point is to enjoy quilting your quilt, to have fun with it, and to let it be a creative, free-flowing experience. This was like pulling teeth for me. And that's me being totally honest with you. Everybody's different, so you might actually really enjoy this style of quilting. But I like it only when I'm mixing it with filler designs that allow me to hide some of my mistakes. But that's just my experience. I really hope that you will try stitching in the ditch and see if you like it as a method of finishing your quilts. Of course, it was fairly quick. Despite all of the tying of knots and hiding of threads, it was a pretty quick way of finishing this quilt. Stitching in the ditch also really helps you learn how to follow a line in free motion, and it helps you learn how to maintain the speed of your machine and the movement, fine-tuned movement with your hands. These are necessary lessons that we have to master in free motion quilting. And if you want to give this a try, I'm sure it will help you build both confidence and skill when it comes to free motion quilting. If you don't want to potentially sacrifice a quilt top you've already created, you can take a really big print fabric and try stitching in the ditch along all of the prints. Find something with big, bold flower shapes and stitch around each flower. I promise you, by the time you finish quilting a yard or two of printed fabric, it will be about the same as stitching through one of these small applique quilts. So I don't know about you, but I'm ready to stitch some filler designs. Let's go get the next quilt ready and start free motion quilting some quilting fillers. Don't miss the next part of this quilting series. Go to freemotionquilting.blogspot.com.